In the near 2 months that it ran, She-Hulk Attorney-at-Law garnered more hate than I'd ever seen any other Marvel production do, practically ever. It outraged the internet, with many furious at its presumed woke feminist agenda. Even amongst those who cast social politics aside, there were many who considered She-Hulk a failure due to one very simple but incredibly crucial factor. They found the protagonist to be unlikable. But is the character of Jennifer Walters truly that heinous, that detestable? Is this hateability truly the byproduct of the writer's attempt at forcing woke feminist propaganda? Or could it be intentional? Could the negative character traits that made Jennifer Walters as disliked as she was actually tie into her character arc? The answer is a little complicated. Our introduction to Jennifer Walters, the woman who soon after becomes the She-Hulk, is rocky, to say the least. In episode 1, we see her gain her powers, and we see her cousin, Bruce, the Hulk, do his best to train her to control those powers, and the violent urges that he expects will follow along with them. But while Bruce struggles to teach Jen the things he wished someone had taught him when he first gained his powers, we constantly witness Jen push him away. She seems uninterested in his teachings, and very dismissive to their necessity. Over the course of her training, we also see her display cockiness and overconfidence. But at this point, these traits have not yet solidified. They are still slight and playful in a time where we are still getting to know this character. They don't fully set in until more than halfway through the episode in one very infamous scene. Bruce instructs Jen about the importance of controlling her anger, but she rebuffs him, claiming that she is great at controlling her anger because her life as a woman has forced her to learn how to, or else suffer the consequences. She says this and then storms off, completely dismissing Bruce's assistance and teachings, insulting him and completely pushing him away. At this point, as viewers, we instinctively recoil. For regular MCU fans, the Hulk is a familiar face. Bruce is regarded as a sweetheart and a genius, and a generally likable character. To see this familiar character so mistreated by a character we're meant to regard as a protagonist, the character we're meant to follow for the duration of this show, makes us immediately gain a negative outlook upon her. Primarily, it emphasizes the cockiness and overconfidence that we'd glimpsed before. Jen believes that she has her emotions under control and is unwilling to accept any different. She believes herself to be infallible when it comes to anger because she considers that she's had to contend with infuriating situations all her life. And this stubbornness of opinion makes for another flaw of its own. Jen refuses to accept the fact that mostly every human being is prone to outbursts of emotion. The fact that almost everyone can have one bad day that finally snaps their composure. To me, this scene isn't indicative of the show's man-hating view. It isn't woke Hollywood and a mostly female writer's room trying to tell us that women are better than men. It isn't forced feminist propaganda. Jen's negative traits are not presented as good or as right or as justified, and are thus not meant to mirror the writer's thoughts, feelings, and social beliefs. Jen's negative traits are merely that. They are flaws for a fictional character. Very clear flaws that represent a crucial part of the character's journey, and square one of her character arc. The Jennifer we meet in episode 1 is a flawed character. She is cocky, stubborn, and overconfident. Her faith in her own emotional maturity is too great. Additionally, she is uninterested in becoming a superhero, a sentiment she echoes often. More than that, she seems dismissive and unappreciative of superheroes in general. She appears to not value them as the rest of the world does, or at the very least does not appreciate their many sacrifices for the world. As we see later on in the show, superheroes are much more commonplace in current times. They are much more about flash and spectacle, merely icons to be sensationalized, as opposed to actual beacons of good. We see this most clearly through individuals like Leapfrog, who are interested in heroism merely for the sake of the theatrics and the attention. No matter the context, Jen does not care for superheroes. But that isn't because she's evil or ungrateful or just a bad person in general. It's because she doesn't understand superheroes. She doesn't understand the nuances and intricacies of a hero's life, the many sacrifices, difficulties, and hardships. And in the face of her immediate identity crisis, she doesn't realize that she will soon have to contend with these intricacies, whether she chooses to be a hero or not, and that is what Bruce is trying to teach her. Therefore, at the end, Jen's cockiness, her stubbornness, and her dismissal of superheroes and their lives are born out of ignorance and not out of an ill nature. Jen is cocky and stubborn and believes that she can control her anger and emotions because she's lived her whole life in a position of weakness. As a regular human being in a world of mutants and monsters, you are powerless. And to be a woman in a male-dominated society is even more so on top of it. Jen has lived her whole life lacking the ability to cause immediate change. At any point throughout her day, Jennifer Walters can get verbally assaulted, physically harassed, or even outright attacked, and she would be able to do very little except take it to the law. As someone who lacks power, you are somewhat forced to control your anger and quell your emotions, because your outbursts will not cause immediate change. They won't greatly impact the world around you. When all anger does is make your situation worse, you learn to bottle it up or keep it under wraps. But that is the life of any normal human. And that was the life of Jennifer Walters. With her newfound abilities, she is no longer powerless. She no longer lacks the ability to cause immediate change. Her anger and her emotion as She-Hulk can change the world around her and bend it to her will. And thus, even though it might have been easy to control her anger as Jennifer Walters, now that she has gained these powers, and with them the power to cause immediate, drastic change, it becomes much harder to keep herself in check. Power corrupts, which is why many people change as soon as their capabilities change. Jen is unaware of this. She's ignorant of how much different life is going to be now that she can actually do things when she's angry. It's no longer futile frustration, it's instead the Hulk-fueled rage that can hurt and can destroy. The Jennifer we meet in episode 1 is overconfident in her own self-control because she's never wielded the ability to cause major change and doesn't realize the massive amount of restraint required to stop herself from doing so. She doesn't care about superheroes or their sacrifices because she's never had to be one and has never experienced it firsthand. She's never had to understand them because they exist outside of her narrow scope. She is a lawyer, helping people in her own smaller, more direct, less complicated way. This all combines to give us a Jennifer who dismisses her cousin's help and pushes him away, who refuses to be like him or to be a superhero in general. But none of it is because she's bad, it's all because she's ignorant. And the thing is, I firmly believe that this was the writer's intent with the show. This flawed Jennifer is who we're meant to meet. This is made clear by the journey that follows. But the issue that happens here is that by starting off the show highlighting your protagonist's worst traits, their greatest flaws, before you've had a chance to introduce us to their good values, the audience's immediate reaction is going to be negative. Instead of creating a generally likable character whose flaws are obstacles the audience wants to see overcome, you create a disliked character whose goodness and value needs to instead be proven and who the audience needs to learn to love. Had this montage with Hulk come later on in the show, at a point where we learned more about Jen, it would have been much more effective. We would have had justification for her overconfidence and further insight into her dismissal of superheroes. But it came at a very early point in the series and determined our initial impressions of who our protagonist was. It doesn't even need to be pushed later on in the series. It could have even worked from the start had it been a little less heavy-handed. But the writers were too harsh in highlighting Jen's flaws that they made her too hard to like. When I first started watching the series, I surmised the direction Jen's character arc was meant to take, but it was still a struggle to keep myself from disliking her. It took active effort on my part to keep an open mind and not let her initial behavior color my whole impression of her. And so to summarize, I firmly believe that the writers intended to display these traits as flaws from the start. They didn't support them and believe in them, and they didn't encourage Jen's behavior in some blind support of women, or aimed to paint them in a good light no matter their mistakes, as many people seem to believe. Accordingly, Jen didn't go throughout the rest of the series without being punished for these traits and behavior. She was punished, thus affirming that the writers did indeed regard them as flaws. The writers wanted to show us the wrongs in Jen's character, but they obviously didn't intend to make her hateable. However, in shining too bright of a light upon the negative, they ended up blinding the positives and starting the audience off on the wrong foot. The reasons for Jen's flaws are only made clear as the series progresses and we start to see more of the good side, learning who she really is. We see her shyness, her awkwardness, and her desire to please others. We realize that she is mistreated by many in her life, We see her struggle to come to terms with this superior, much better regarded version of herself, the She-Hulk. We start to sympathize with the crisis of identity that she's facing. Her aversion to becoming a superhero and her desire to avoid it at all costs is slowly broken down throughout the course of the show. As the show progresses, as her identity issues start to grow and she starts to realize the extent of her own strength, Jen starts to ease into the fact that she will have to be a hero. The first step happens in the first episode against Titania. Another crucial one happens when she chooses to temporarily abandon her hot date in order to help Wong fight off the Bat Demons. But the most important step in her journey happens in episode 8. By episode 8, Jen is still overconfident and unaccepting of the very real possibility that she might lose control of her emotions. She's slightly more heroic, but she hasn't yet embraced or accepted this part of her. When she meets Matt Murdock at the bar, this finally starts to change. Matt shows Jennifer the value of superheroes. He tells her that as Jen, she can help people when society fails them. But he teaches her that as She-Hulk, she can help people when the law fails them. And she starts to see the value of it, the weight of being a superhero. But then she has to fight with him as Daredevil, and we see her tossing cars and smashing parking lots. She's violent and over the top, causing massive property damage and easily being in a position to kill others. But this is also a part of her journey. She's just realizing the extent of her own strength and still learning to deal with its repercussions. When she accompanies Daredevil into Leapfrog's lair, she's still being cocky and overconfident. She wants to do things her own way as opposed to Matt's, and she wants to go in guns blazing and beat everyone to death, while Matt instructs her to do otherwise. And despite his pleas, she still does what she wants, stubbornly crashing through the ceiling and slamming the goons beneath her. This is her still not realizing the responsibility that comes with her massive strength. Daredevil's advice and instruction here are received, but they are not yet applied. Not until the final moments of episode 8. It is only when Intelligentsia humiliates her at the gala that Jennifer's character arc reaches its climax. As she suffers this great humiliation and embarrassment, she is overcome with a surge of emotion. And contrary to what she expected, she loses control and ends up flying into a rage, destroying the screen and the area around her, causing massive damage and putting innocent people at risk. We finally get the payoff of the flaws introduced in episode 1. We're finally shown that Jennifer Walters is not invincible in the face of anger. She's not always in control, and she's not better than us. The importance of Bruce's lessons finally become clear to her. The vast limitlessness of her own strength also becomes clear to her, as she realizes that she can cause massive pain and damage with such ease. The great responsibility that comes with the great powers that heroes wield is finally made obvious. Her anger and her recklessness has real-world repercussions on her and the people around her, and so she must always be cautious with it. Episode 9 is meant to wrap up Jen's character arc. It's supposed to show us the person she has become after growing over the course of the series. It's a very crucial step in finalizing the character's journey over the course of the series. But the finale, sadly, does not succeed at accomplishing this. Look, I didn't think the finale was the worst thing in the world, or the most terrible, or the death of the MCU. I think it was just over-ambitious. In a show that constantly sought to emphasize the fact that it was self-aware of the problems and the huge scale of the MCU, a show that pushed and resisted against the MCU's status quo to firmly place itself as a legal comedy, in a show like that, this ending does not work. In an attempt to comment on the general state of the MCU, its overall formulaic nature and very commercial pursuits, and in an effort to set itself apart from its other productions, She-Hulk shatters the fourth wall completely to deliver commentary on the state of the MCU and to tell us and itself that big, flashy battles and gigantic set pieces is not all Marvel is good for. It tells us that it can also be good for small, character-driven stories. It can give Jennifer Walters her own show, a small-scale legal drama that focuses on her coming to terms with her new identity and the responsibilities that it entails. But what She-Hulk ends up doing is abandoning its protagonist's character arc just when it is meant to come to an end. In an effort to tell us about the importance of character stories in the face of the general flow of the MCU, She-Hulk ends up neglecting its own protagonist's story and delivers an unsatisfying conclusion to a long journey of growth and maturity. Its focus on not Being an over-the-top visual spectacle ends up becoming just that, an over-the-top visual spectacle, but with the added touch of meta-commentary. She-Hulk, attorney-at-law, by preaching about the faults of the MCU in this exaggerated, show-stopping, mind-blowing way, ends up becoming its worst enemy. It ends up becoming an exaggerated visual spectacle that conveniently forgets about its characters and the path they have taken, only to give us a big wow moment. And that isn't to say that the commentary the She-Hulk finale provides is lame or unsuccessful. There is value there and an interesting story that only a fourth wall breaking character like She-Hulk can tell. Ultimately, I can appreciate what they were trying to do, but I can't accept it as an ending to their show, as opposed to a more satisfying, character-focused conclusion. And maybe if all the meta fourth wall breaking had been set up more effectively and shown to have a larger impact, I could have accepted this episode as another one in the series. But even then, I could not have accepted it as the finale. The events of this episode would have been less jarring and instead would not have destroyed the flow of the series as badly, and they wouldn't have sacrificed the story they actually seem to be trying to tell ever since episode 1. The journey of Jennifer Walters learning about the weight and responsibilities of power and the necessity of self-control in the face of that power. We actually end up getting only 2 short moments to show us the culmination of Jennifer's character development. After concluding her conversation with Kevin, Jennifer returns to witness the conclusion of the intelligentsia incel gathering. She approaches Todd, who thinks he's about to get killed, but then does the classic "I'm not gonna hurt you, I'm gonna do the right thing instead" by telling him she's taking him to court. This brief, few-second interaction is meant to show us her coming to terms with her own anger and finally controlling it. She's realized that she's prone to outbursts, and she's realized the necessity of keeping all that rage in check. The last scene in the episode shows us a reporter asking She-Hulk if she'll be coming after the baddies as a lawyer in court or as a superhero, to which she replies, both. That second moment signifies her finally accepting her role as a superhero. She finally sees the weight they hold and the responsibilities they have, and has realized that with great power comes great responsibility. It's a massively underwhelming conclusion to what was a very interesting character arc. We reach the climax in episode 8 as Jennifer loses control, but in the finale we don't see her actually come to terms with her feelings and accept them. Instead, her arc is cast aside in order to finish on a big meta bang. All we get are 2 snippets of scenes that mark the end state of her character's development, even though we've missed out on the crucial transitory phases that need to occur between the climax of episode 8 and the resolution of Jennifer's growth at the end of episode 9. There was a lot to be admired in She-Hulk, especially on the character side of things. And while the failure in her introduction can be swallowed if you force yourself really hard to keep an open mind, the devastating crash that is the conclusion is unforgivable. It is a frankly sad ending to what could have been, to me, one of the MCU's most interesting modern characters to date, a female protagonist that goes beyond our stereotypical MCU character, and is instead deep enough to have real, interesting human flaws and shortcomings. Although this did not entirely ruin the show for me, it stopped it from being truly amazing. As a whole, I felt like the show almost accomplished what it set out to do quite efficiently, which is to be a character-driven legal comedy. If you ignore the massive faults of the finale, I feel like there is something to be admired here, and I'm interested in seeing what the showrunners will do for the character, development-wise, moving forward. That is, if they get to move forward. If you've made it this far into the video, I just want to sincerely thank you from the bottom of my heart. I truly appreciate you giving me your time, and I'm infinitely grateful. If you like this video essay and want to see others like it, consider liking the video and subscribing. I try to put something out every week. Anyways, take care, and I'll hopefully see you soon. Goodbye.